Welcome to Wetpixel Live. I'm Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor from Wetpixel, and I'm joined today by Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi,
Um,
Adamski.
back to the 80s. Great. So, one of the most one of the most discussed topics on, or perennial topics possibly on the Wetpixel forums, is how underwater photographers manage to travel with their equipment. And by this, we're primarily talking about traveling on airlines. So, both of us have travelled or do travel a great deal in normal times, certainly. And so it's probably worth discussing some ideas that we have that may help you to travel with all this heavy gear. So, Alex, how do you go about traveling with that big D5 and its housing and everything else that you have?
Well, I have to say this is a favourite topic of mine. Not favourite is maybe the wrong word, but it's a topic that I'm talking and thinking about a great deal. So, I think this discussion, although we talk about travel tips, it's really about how to get all our gear around the world with us. I think one of the great things about being an underwater photographer is it takes us all around the world. And one of the challenges of being an underwater photographer is getting all the gear we need all around the world with us. So I think my first tip is really to do your research well about a destination. Now, if you're traveling with a good travel agent, I run a lot of my workshops when they're not with Wetpixel, with Scuba Travel in the UK, and they're really good at giving me this information. But if I'm traveling on my own, or as many of you may be traveling on your own, do your research, find out about the destination so you know what gear you need to take, both in terms of diving gear and camera gear. Social media can be really good for that. I often will, if I'm going to a particular destination, we'll just send quick messages to friends the week before. Hey, what's the water temperature? What's the wetsuit you're wearing? Because, that can make a really big difference. There's nothing worse than being cold for a whole trip. You're cold on the first day and you've got 2 weeks of diving. It's not a nice feeling. But at the same time, taking a really heavy wetsuit on every trip, it's a lot of extra kilos. And it's not that, I always say the balance with luggage, it's all about just freeing up those few kilos that allow you to take all those extra bits of gear. It's not about, so it's every time you're able to save a little bit, it can make a really big difference in the amount of gear you can take. So doing that research really helps you do it. I think I'll go straight into the second tip, which is part of this, is choose airlines that have diver-friendly baggage allowances, and there's plenty of those around the world, or do airlines that allow you relatively cheaply to purchase extra luggage. But above all of that, make sure you know the rules of your airline and pack to them. Yeah. I've turned up to flights where I've had more luggage than other people on the flight, both traveling on the same ticket. And because mine fitted the bureaucratic system that the airline had, I could take all my luggage on board, or in the hold and on board, and they actually had to pay excess baggage fees, and I had far more total luggage. Airlines may have, this bag can be this size. So treat the packing process as a bureaucratic process. Yeah. Pack to their restrictions. And then the other thing, I'm going to talk forever, so I'm sorry, Adam, I'm not letting you in. But the other thing is that with airlines, when you're checking in, you can make a really big difference if you're skirting those limits to getting your stuff on board. And I would say by far the most important thing is to be polite and friendly at check-in, be cooperative, and then when you're questioned, you'll be amazing how much more leniency there is. The staff that check in stuff, they're given a degree of flexibility in what they'll let you get away with. And if you're the friendly, helpful, chatty person, you're going to get that. If you're Mr. or Mrs. Aggressive, chances are you're going to find the rules are applied to the absolute letter of the law.
Yeah, you're right, Alex. I'm not a very chatty person, nor are you normally. So obviously we managed to fake it, I think. I've had lots of experiences where I have been over limit, and I know I've been over limit, but simply by basically being nice and smiling, and that tends to set people up the right way, and they're more likely to go with the flow and let you through with that bit of extra leniency that they do have. Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
I think that I would also clarify that, but it's more the case that I know the limits the airline setting. As I said, it's a bureaucratic thing, and I have hand scales at home and in the car and everywhere, and I know exactly what my luggage is. But if I'm trying to sneak that little bit extra, I might be, that kilo over the limit, and that's what I'm talking about. If you turn up with 10 kilos over, you're unlikely, or a whole extra bag, you're not going to get away with that. But if you can sneak an extra kilo in, across the board in each bag, that might be 2 or 3 extra kilos, which is, quite a bit of extra camera equipment. That could be, 2 or 3 extra strobes. So it can make a really big difference.
I think this is one of the things, and I know from experience that you and I differ in the way that we pack for trips. And so my approach is that I always want to make sure that I arrive at my destination with sufficient gear to be able to shoot. And that may not be all my gear, but it's a setup that allows me to shoot. So in my carry-on, I'll always have a camera housing, a strobe, an appropriate port, a lens, so on and so forth. Now that may mean there's quite a lot of other stuff in my hold baggage, and that tends to mean that my carry-on is heavier than it should be, and this is very much, I think, going back to this idea of being nice. Occasionally they get weighed at check-in, and at that point it becomes that's where the attitude that you have towards the check-in stuff makes a huge difference. And I touch wood, you can normally get away with it, but it does take a bit of effort.
Yeah, I think that's actually was one of my coming points. Actually, was about carry-on gear, and I would say that is very good advice. That whenever possible, whenever it's allowed by the rules, you should take in your carry-on gear as much of your photography gear as you can do, and ideally that complete system. Now, as you said, that's not something I do. And I'll explain why in a little bit, but I do think that's really important advice. One thing is important to say, though, when it comes to carry-on, is different airlines have very different rules about carry-on. Yeah. If you fly a lot in the States, a lot of the Americans that come on trips, even in economy, are allowed 2 large pieces of carry-on luggage. Whereas a lot of the flights out of Europe, it can be 1 small piece with a very, very strict luggage allowance on it. Yep. So it's important to know what your rules are, and that's why I said it's a bureaucratic. I think we're very lucky living on an island, because you and I, we don't need to fly through lots of hubs, and that's usually the way that you tend to lose baggage. We're lucky that we can fly most places fairly directly without too many changes of plane.
Yeah, I think that generally is why I think the airlines have improved their baggage handling. I think there's a general kind of, they seem to be able to find stuff most of the time. So yeah. I
think they've put a lot of effort into it, to be honest, and it's not something that's talked about a lot. The thing that I think is probably the most important thing for me when coming to packing for travel is having really, really light dive gear, and it can make a huge difference into your total luggage. I remember when a few years ago when airlines had some quite strict baggage policies, I could take my whole dive kit for a tropical trip in a bag at 7 kilos. I remember going to Bali with just 7 kilos of dive gear with, wetsuit, fins, BCD, reg, mask, snorkel, in a bag. The whole thing was 7 kilos. I used to use a thin string bag. It was strong, but, super light. The gear was in there, and it was just a fantastic way to travel. I tend to take a little bit more now. Usually because I sort of have figured out other ways of saving weight across my luggage, or ways of paying for a little bit of extra luggage. But it is possible to really tailor things down. The big areas that you can save with dive gear is, first of all, regulators. Yeah. There's some very heavy, very, very well-made big brass regulators. There were also some really lightweight regulators out there. So those lightweight regulators can make a huge saving, 2 or 3 kilos in one go. Leaving extra hoses on your regulator. If you want to pay extra baggage, fine. But, you don't need to leave your dry suit inflator hose on your regulator on a tropical trip to prove to everyone you're a dry suit diver. Just bore them about it in the bar. That'll be fine. You don't need to leave that on. Also, those big integrated dive computers that weigh a ton. All those things make the regulator weigh so much more. You can, if you want a secondary computer, buy one of the watch ones. They're a great way to, you can wear it for the trip. You can use it to wake you up in the morning, and it means you've got an extra dive computer on every dive. So I think those are great savings. There's some really good lightweight BCDs around these days. For a lot of travel, it means tropical diving. You don't need necessarily super high performance BCDs, particularly if you dive on the right weights. You'd be amazed how little. I actually often spend whole trips never putting air in my BCD. Because I'm a real stickler for diving as light as I can on lead, which means that I don't need to put air in my BCD. I'm not wearing a thick wetsuit. It doesn't really change much with buoyancy, with depth. And so, as a result, I don't put air in my BCD. I wear a BCD for surface safety, but I never put air in it. But I have been thinking more and more in some destinations of potentially going with just a harness on trips.
Yeah.
But I've never quite done that.
That's the minimalist approach.
Yeah, but I never put air in my BCD. So why have a BCD? Why take it? Anyway, that I'm not going to do that, but it has crossed my mind. The other big area to save on dive gear is boots and fins. I do nearly all my trips with foot fins, molded foot fins. I know a lot of people say they're uncomfortable. I find mine super comfortable. And I think maybe the first dive or two, they take breaking in like any shoe, but I never struggle with them. I also wear those thin socks underneath them, which, just those thin lycra socks that also help them be a little bit more comfortable. But I find them really comfortable, and the weight saving there is huge. A pair of relatively basic foot fins weighs 1 kilo. Heavy duty diving fins weigh 2 or 3 kilos to begin with. Then you've got boots that weigh most of another kilo, and certainly over 1 kilo when they're wet, and they're a pain to dry at the end of the trip. And that is, across those three, you're saving 5 or 6 kilos of weight, and your camera system weighs about that. You really can save almost that much from your dive gear.
Fins are again a topic that crops up in the forums a lot. People, what's the best fin for underwater photography? The short answer, there isn't one. It depends on where you are and what you're doing. If you're diving macro in Lembear, where there's limited current, and if there is, you're probably not, you're going to sit somewhere out the way of the current anyway, you don't need a big powerful fin. A little cheap pool type fin is fine. And conversely, if you're dealing with strong currents, then maybe you want a fin that's got a bit more power, allow you to move through the water. But certainly, the weight thing, so things like only use boots and open heel fins when you need the warmth or the protection of the boot. Most of the time you don't.
If you're going to a big shore diving destination, then it's boots who can become. And I even, there's some trips I take my free diving fins on. I think some of the East Pacific diving, Galapagos, Socorro, where you're not near the reef, you're really in the blue all the time, and the extra power of those. Yeah. On those trips, I'll dive in free diving fins, but I don't use them anywhere near a reef because they're a disaster. But they're actually in the blue. They're great, particularly when you need to motor in the blue to get, out and amongst schools of fish or big animals.
Yeah. I think the diving gear is at the end of the day, we're diving to take pictures, not to dive. So we need functional dive gear that's light and simple rather than all the bells and whistles that we might use for more challenging types of diving. Yeah.
I know a lot of people rent dive gear on destinations, and I definitely use rental gear on some trips to save baggage allowance so I can take more camera gear, basically. I think one thing I wasn't sure I made really clear at the beginning is I said that packing for the airline is a bureaucratic process, but I always pack to the limits. I've always got more gear than I can possibly take, and it's kind of a case I'll always pack up to the absolute maximum on every trip to get as much gear as I can out there, and that's why the weight saving becomes so important. Lightweight luggage really helps as well, actually. Yeah. That's another really big saver. Yeah. I don't use heavy Pelican-style camera cases. I use lightweight, hard-shelled suitcases, which I found have been perfectly protective of my camera gear for loads and loads of trips. I've never had a problem with them. And dive gear in simple, sort of those rubberized canvas bags, that sailing, and they're called sailing bags. But everyone makes them, or cargo bags. They're very common, but a really lightweight way of taking gear. The final thing I wanted to say was actually one of the best things that can help you pack well for a trip is experience.
Yes.
And one of the best ways to learn that experience is to make lists. And I know lots of underwater photographers make lists because there's nothing worse than arriving on a destination with everything and you're missing the one piece of gear that stops it all working, whether that's a
bolt.
The smallest thing can stop the whole system working. Yeah. So having checklists is really valuable. Also on that checklist, if you go on a trip, a lot of people when they come back from the trip, they get that checklist out and they add items to it. If they've used medicines and things like that, they'll write them on there, order them in then, so they're ready to go for the next trip. If there's things they're not using, get them off the list. Stop taking them away on trips. Yeah. You don't, if you find you're on a hardcore photography trip and you're not going to have time to read 5 books, don't keep carrying them around the world with you. And the same with, if you're going to a resort that's, provides you with toiletries and things, then maybe you don't need to start taking your own toiletries all the way around the world with you. And those are areas where you can save things. But I know that keeping lists really help lots of people pack in terms of not forgetting stuff, but also when you unpack at the end of the trip, that's a really good time to make the list for the next trip so that it's ready to go, so you get everything together.
Yeah, I was speaking to Michelle Hall. Michelle Hall was saying that she has lists for different types of diving as well, which is an interesting. Yeah.
No, I'd completely agree with that too. Yeah, it's why they're really valuable. And obviously, if you type them into the computer, you can save them in a folder, and they're all there for next time you need them. I think the other thing for me that can help people on trips is if you are worried about forgetting things, is you can always get your camera gear out of storage or your housing, put it all together at home, make sure it's all working before the trip, and then transport that gear as one system into another room and pack from there. That way it's a really good way of not forgetting the little bits that make everything work because you've actually put it all together. I think one of the mistakes you can make is get it all out of the cupboard and then just pack it straight in the suitcase, and that's when you can forget something.
And that can make the difference between a successful and productive photographic trip and one that is, well, less successful and productive. So lots of great ideas there. And thanks very much, Alex. If you want to see some more of Alex's work, you can check him out on Instagram.
It's a great place. Alex Mustard 1 on Instagram, but if you just type in Mustard, I'm sure you'll find me pretty quickly.
You'll find him under Mustard. All right, so thanks very much to everyone for watching, and thank you very much to our sponsors. So our sponsor for this episode is XIT 404 from California. So thanks very much to them for their sponsorship, and they make it all possible. And please add comments, likes, suggestions for future episodes in the comments down below underneath this video, and we'll try and respond to them. And if you've got suggestions, obviously we'll consider them for future episodes. So thanks very much. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you soon.